I want to tell you about the day the Vex Choir found out what a backup unit actually meant when the request came from a human garrison. Because before that day, nobody in the outer perimeter had ever seen it happen, not once in 6 cycles of war. Part 1: The Distress Call. The moon was called Korath 9, a gray little rock hanging off the edge of the Ashen Belt, and nobody wanted it. That was the joke among the garrison: nobody wants Korath 9 until somebody else has it. It had no minerals worth mining, no strategic beauty, nothing except one long-range comms relay buried under 6 meters of frozen rock, and a crew of 41 soldiers who'd drawn the short straw of guarding it. I was there. Not as a soldier, I was attached as a field logistics officer, which is a polite way of saying I counted crates and made sure the coffee didn't run out. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is what I watched happen over 11 hours on a moon most star charts don't even bother labeling. It started with static. Corporal Reyes was on comms duty that rotation, headset half off her ear, because the relay had been humming with interference for 2 days straight. Something about the ion storms rolling off the belt. She was drinking her coffee cold because the heater in the mess had been busted since Tuesday, and I remember she made a face at it. That specific face people make when the coffee's gone wrong, but they drink it anyway because complaining takes more energy than swallowing. Then the static cracked open, and a voice came through that didn't belong to any of our 41. "This is Outpost Serenity 4, do you copy? This is not a drill." Reyes sat up so fast her chair rolled back into the wall. Serenity 4 was a science outpost 2 systems over, mostly civilians. A skeleton crew of maybe 15 people doing atmospheric research on a planet that had no business being interesting to anyone. I remember the room going quiet in that particular way rooms go quiet, when everyone realizes at the same moment that something has gone very wrong very far away. The message was garbled, cutting in and out, but the pieces we caught were enough. Vex Choir Raiders. Not a scouting party, a full incursion fleet, the kind that shows up when a species has decided a place is worth taking rather than worth watching. Serenity 4's shields were already down. Their one defense turret had jammed on the first volley. 15 people, mostly botanists and a couple of geologists, and one retired Marine named Havorson who ran the tiny security detail more as a formality than an expectation of ever using it. Need immediate backup. Repeat, immediate backup. We have civilians, we have children. That last word did something to the room. Children. 3 of the researchers had brought their families. Korath 9 garrison commander, a woman named Okonkwo Bryant who had survived 2 campaigns and buried more friends than she liked to count, didn't even look up from the console before she was already moving. "How far is Serenity 4 from us?" she asked. 40 minutes at best burn, said the navigator, a lanky guy named Priya who chewed his pen when he was nervous and was chewing it now. "Get me a shuttle, full response team. I want everyone who can hold a rifle in that bay in 10 minutes. And here's the thing you have to understand about that moment: this wasn't some big cinematic decision made after a speech. Okonkwo Bryant didn't pause. She didn't weigh the odds. 40 minutes away, an incursion fleet, 15 civilians, kids. There wasn't a decision to make. There was just a thing that needed doing and people who were going to go do it. I watched 26 soldiers suit up in under 8 minutes. I watched them check each other's seals without being asked, the way you check on a friend's coat before they walk into the cold, an automatic thing, done 1,000 times before. Nobody was shouting. Nobody was crying dramatically. Someone was humming an old song under her breath while she loaded a rifle. Another guy cracked a joke about how Serenity 4 better have decent coffee waiting for them, because Korath's coffee maker was still busted. That's the part people don't understand about us, I think. When it matters, we don't get loud. We get quiet and fast. Part 2: What the Vex Expected. I need to explain something about the Vex Choir, because You can't understand what happened next without understanding what they thought they knew. The Vex Choir aren't a single species. They're a coalition, 17 worlds bound by an old treaty and a newer hunger. 4 main species fused together under one banner and one set of tactics. Their soldiers are called Threns, tall, lean, built for endurance in low gravity, with reflexes that put most galactic species to shame. Fast, disciplined, coordinated down to the breath. And they had a file on humans. Everyone did by then. The war had been running for 6 years, and every major faction had compiled their reports, their psych profiles, their tactical assessments. The Vex Choir's assessment of humanity, according to what we found afterward on a captured data core, read something like this. Subject species evolved under extreme environmental pressure, high pain tolerance, elevated aggression response under threat to kin group, physically unremarkable compared to Thren baseline, primary tactical advantage, numbers and improvisation. Recommend standard engagement protocol with 1.3x caution multiplier. A caution multiplier, like we were a slightly spicier variant of an ordinary meal. The commander of the incursion force at Serenity 4 was a Thren named Voskilari, third in his hatch line, decorated twice for efficient planetary suppressions. His report, recovered later, showed he expected the outpost to fall within the hour. 15 unarmed researchers and 1 aging security officer. He wasn't wrong about that part. Serenity 4 was never going to hold. What he didn't account for was that somebody was going to answer that distress call. And what he really didn't account for was who. Part 3, the landing. 40 minutes. That's what Priya said, and that's about what it took, though I swear every minute of it felt 3 times as long. I wasn't in the strike shuttle. I was in the second transport, the support craft carrying medical supplies and extra ammunition, watching through the tiny viewport as Serenity 4 grew from a smudge of light into a burning outpost with 3 Vex Choir cruisers hanging in high orbit like vultures who hadn't bothered to land yet, because why would they hurry? Halvorsen, the retired Marine, the one running outpost security, had done something smart in those 40 minutes. He hadn't tried to fight the Thren boarding party head-on, not with 15 civilians and no real weapons to speak of. He'd barricaded everyone into the deep storage bunker beneath the main research dome, the one meant for seed samples and equipment, reinforced concrete 3 meters thick. And he'd bought time the only way he could, by making the Thren think there was nothing left worth taking, letting them ransack the dome above while the people who mattered sat in the dark below, breathing quiet. A mother with her hand over her son's mouth, not because he was crying, but because she was terrified he might. That's what we found out later from Halvorsen himself, who told it flat and unembellished, the way people do when they've relived something so many times the drama's worn off it, and only the facts are left. Our shuttle came in low, engines throttled to minimize the burn signature, and Okonkwo Bryant gave one order before the doors opened. Get the civilians out. Everything else is secondary. 26 soldiers went out into a battlefield that outnumbered them roughly 3-1. I want to be honest with you, I've heard people tell this story since in bars, at reunions, and some of them make it sound like a clean fight, like something out of an old war film. It wasn't. It was chaos. It was cold and dark and full of smoke from the burning dome, and the Thren were fast, faster than anything human, closing distance in a blink, their weapons cutting blue light through the haze. But here's what the Vex Choir file didn't mention, the thing that never shows up in a psych profile no matter how detailed. It didn't mention that humans, when something they love is on the line, don't calculate the odds. They don't check the caution multiplier. They just go. Sergeant Dmitry Aslanov. I remember his name because he used to fix the mess hall's coffee machine in his off hours, which is a strange thing to remember about a man who did what he did that night. Took a Thren strike team head-on at the bunker entrance, alone, for nearly 90 seconds, while 2 of his squad mates dragged an injured researcher clear. 90 seconds against 3 Thren soldiers. He took a hit to the shoulder that should have put him down and kept his rifle up anyway, because the door behind him hadn't sealed yet, because there were still people coming through. Voskillerai, watching the feed from his cruiser, apparently said something to his second that got translated later as, "That is not standard engagement behavior." No, it wasn't. Part 4: The Turn. Here's the moment that changed the whole night, and I got this part second-hand from Reyes, who was monitoring comms from the transport and caught the whole exchange. Voskillerai had expected resistance. He'd planned for it, in the loose way you plan for a fight you already believe you'll win. What he hadn't planned for was Okonkwo Bryant herself walking straight into the smoke toward the dome's ruined command spire, where 3 Thren soldiers had pinned down a science team trying to retrieve backup data drives. Because apparently, even mid-invasion, half the researchers refused to leave without their 6 months of atmospheric readings, which honestly, is such a specific and human kind of stubborn that it makes me laugh every time I think about it. Okonkwo Bryant didn't have backup with her in that moment. She'd sent her people ahead to secure the bunker exit and gone back alone for the stragglers, because that's the kind of commander she was, the kind who counted heads twice and went back for the miscount. The Thren saw one human, alone, and moved to close the gap fast, the way predators do when they sense an easy kill. She didn't run. I've thought about this a lot since, why she didn't run, when running would have been the smart thing, the survivable thing. And I think the answer is simpler than people want it to be. There were still 3 researchers behind her who hadn't made it out. Running meant they didn't either. She held her position at a supply crate for cover, took the first Thren down with a shot through a gap in his light armor that Reyes said later was not the kind of shot you get lucky with twice. And then the crate behind her took a hit and split, and for about 4 seconds, Reyes counted it off the comm timestamp, 4 seconds. Okonkwo Bryant had no cover at all, 2 Thren closing on her position, and the researchers behind her frozen because there was nowhere for them to go either. That's when Aslanov's team, having finished sealing the bunker, heard her call sign go quiet and turned back without being ordered to. I think that's the part of this story that matters most, if I'm honest. Not the shooting, not the tactics, it's that nobody had to tell them to go back. They just did. Same as she had. They reached her with maybe 10 seconds to spare, which in a firefight might as well be an hour or might as well be nothing, depending on how the universe is feeling that day. That day, it was enough. Voskillerai, watching all this unfold from orbit, made the decision that would end up in every Vex Choir post-incident report written about that night. He pulled his remaining ground forces back to the cruisers. Not because he'd lost. Numerically, he hadn't. He still had the greater force, still had orbital superiority, still had every advantage a tactical computer would tell you mattered. He pulled back because, in his own words from the recovered log, the cost calculation has changed. These are not defending a position. They are retrieving each other. That is a different kind of enemy. Part 5: What was left when the smoke cleared. By the time the Vex Choir cruisers broke orbit, not fleeing exactly, more like recalculating, the way you back slowly away from a dog that turned out to be bigger than you thought. The sun was coming up over Serenity 4's ruined dome, and it was very quiet. I got out of the transport once the all-clear came through, and the first thing I remember is the smell. Burnt metal, and under it, something green and growing from the botany labs that had somehow survived. This strange contrast of destruction and living things that stuck with me more than anything else that morning. 15 civilians, all 15 alive. The mother, with her hand over her son's mouth, was sitting outside the bunker entrance with him, wrapped in a thermal blanket, both of them just staring at nothing. The particular stillness of people whose bodies haven't caught up yet with the fact that the danger's over. Our garrison lost 3. Aslanov survived barely. They had him in a medical pod within the hour, and I heard he made a joke about the coffee machine before he went under sedation, which honestly sounds exactly like something he'd do. 2 others didn't make it. I won't list their names here because this isn't my story to tell about them specifically, but I want you to know they were real. They had people who loved them, and they went back into that smoke without being ordered to, same as everyone else. Halvorsen, the retired Marine who'd held that bunker shut with nothing but grit and good planning, shook Okonkwo Bryant's hand afterward and didn't say much. Just, "Thank you for coming." And she said, "Thank you for holding." That was it. No speeches. People who have actually been through something rarely need many words for it afterward. It's usually the people who weren't there who need the speeches. Part 6: The Aftermath and What It Meant. The Vex Choir command structure, from what we pieced together later through intercepted communications, spent the following weeks in what I can only describe as quiet confusion. Voskillerai's report went up the chain, and it apparently triggered a re-review of the entire human engagement protocol across 3 Vex Choir fleet groups. The word that kept coming up in the intercepts, translated roughly, was something like irrational persistence. They couldn't model it. Their tactical computers were built on cost-benefit logic. You retreat when the cost outweighs the objective. You press when it doesn't. But humans, over and over in engagement after engagement, kept doing something their systems flagged as statistically incorrect, risking everything for people who, tactically speaking, weren't worth the risk. 15 researchers on a moon nobody cared about. Not a strategic asset. Not worth the caution multiplier by any cold calculation. Except they were worth it, because that's not how the math works for us. That's not how it's ever worked. I think about Koreth 9 sometimes, that busted coffee maker nobody ever got around to fixing, Ray's making her face at the cold coffee before the world went sideways. I think about how ordinary that morning was right up until it wasn't, and how 26 people got into a shuttle in under 10 minutes without anyone needing to explain why it mattered. Okonkwo Bryant retired 2 years after Koreth 9, and I ran into her once at a supply depot on the other side of the sector, gray coming into her hair, still carrying herself like someone counting heads out of old habit. I asked her, half joking, if she remembered that night. She looked at me for a second, and then she said something I've never forgotten. "I don't remember the fighting much. I remember Ray's face when the mother came out of that bunker still holding her kid. That's the part that stays. That's the part that stays for me too, if I'm honest." The Vex Choir never sent another incursion force to that quadrant of the Ashen Belt. Not out of fear, exactly. The official record calls it reallocation of assets. But everyone who was there that night knows what it really was. It was a species that had built its entire war doctrine on cold calculation, running headfirst into something it had no model for. Not a weapon, not a strategy. Just people going back for each other, every single time, whether the math said it was worth it or not. Because you don't send backup to save a distress call. You send it because somewhere behind that static, somebody's still calling your name, and Deathworld humans have never once, in the history of anyone keeping count, learned how to just let that go unanswered.